genel izleyici kitlesi için uygundur.
Saat Farkı'ndan merhabalar. Bölgesel ve küresel meselelere dair farklı perspektiflere yer vermeye çalışıyoruz. Dünyayı Ekotürk'te buluşturuyoruz. Yeni yılda da. Evet, 2024'ün son haftaları itibarıyla Suriye'de yeni bir dönem başladı malum. Yeni dönemden ilk heyet, yani Suriye'nin geçici hükümetinden Dışişleri Bakanı liderliğindeki heyet ilk resmi yurt dışı ziyaretini Suudi Arabistan'a, Körfez ülkesi Suudi Arabistan'a yaptı. Suriye'nin geleceğinde Körfez ve diğer bölge ülkelerinin rolü, Türkiye'nin elbette rolü, bu ülkelerin birbirleriyle arasındaki koordinasyon ve uyumun devamı, Trump'ın ikinci döneminden beklentiler, Orta Doğu politikalarına yönelik beklentiler, İran konusundaki tavrı bundan sonra şüphesiz, çünkü Suriye'de İran'ın etkisi ve nüfuzu azalırken Türkiye'nin giderek artan bir etkisi var. En azından bu dışarıdan böyle görülüyor. Tüm bunların Körfez'den nasıl göründüğünü, özellikle Körfez ülkelerinden nasıl görüldüğüne İlişkin Orta Doğu ve bilhassa Körfez ülkeleri üzerine uzun yıllardır çalışmalar yürüten bir isimle konuşacağız tüm bunları. Washington DC'den Gulf State Analytics isimli araştırma merkezinin kurucusu Giorgio Cafiero bizlerle. Hi Giorgio, welcome to my show. Thank you very much for being with us today and Happy New Year.
Thank you, same to you. Good to be with you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio. Well, not so long ago, Riyadh had restored its ties with the Assad government and was instrumental in Syria's return to the Arab League, ending its regional isolation, reopened its embassy in Sham in Damascus in September 2024. Now we have a total new reality, a complete new picture. So I want to start with this. The first official foreign visit of the Syrian new government was, as you know, made to Saudi Arabia. What was the significance of this visit to Saudi Arabia out of all other countries first? And how do you see from this to this reality before and after?
Yeah, first of all, it's really an honor to be on your show. Thanks for having me as your guest. I certainly think it was very significant how the interim Syrian government had its foreign minister go to Saudi Arabia for his first official visit since taking office. That says a lot about the geopolitical orientation of the post-Assad government in Damascus. I think it's really clear that moving forward, Syria is going to need a lot of support from countries throughout the neighborhood, and the 6 Gulf Arab countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council are set to play an extremely important role when it comes to the reconstruction and development of Syria, but also when it comes to efforts to, quote unquote, legitimize the new government in Syria, not only throughout the wider Arab and Islamic world, but also in the eyes of Western governments, which right now are trying to sort of assess the HTS-led government in Syria. I think, given the fact that Saudi Arabia has close ties to Donald Trump and those in Donald Trump's inner circle, for the new government in Damascus to deepen its relationship with Riyadh can also help in terms of its engagement with the United States and other Western countries. But again, going back to the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, for many years under Bashar al-Assad's government, the Syrian regime was very aligned with Iran, and despite the fact that Assad's government in Riyadh renormalized, there were many problems between Assad and Saudi Arabia, especially after the 2011 uprising erupted. And I think the acting foreign minister going to Riyadh instead of Tehran says so much about the geopolitical orientation of this new government in Damascus.
Giorgio, Syria's de facto leader Ahmed al-Shara, previously known as Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, also said Riyadh, as you mentioned, will certainly have a large role in Syria's future. How are the Gulf Arab states looking at the rise of Hayat Tahrir Sham in Syria, and what are they trying to achieve in relation to post-Assad Syria? I'm asking this question also because do you see any conflicting interests here?
Well, I think that all 6 of the GCC states want to see stability in Syria. Since October 7th, 2023, we have seen how chaos and armed conflicts in some parts of the region are contagious and spill into other parts of the region. And if there were to be renewed conflict in Syria, the Gulf states would be very worried about the potential for that violence to spill across international borders. So above all else, it's really stability and peace that the Gulf states want to see prevail in post-Assad Syria. I think they all want to see the territorial integrity of Syria upheld. They're all very concerned about the possibility of power vacuums emerging in Syria that could be exploited by extremists such as Islamic State. And I think the Gulf states also want to play a role in Syria's reconstruction. There are going to be many opportunities for businesses to profit from the rebuilding of Syria in the years and probably decades to come. So those are all areas where the 6 GCC states have common cause and shared interests. I think we should, however, consider that among the 6 GCC states, there are some different perspectives on the new government in Syria led by HTS. I think probably it is the United Arab Emirates that is the most nervous about having an Islamist government in Damascus. The leadership in Abu Dhabi views the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam in general as a huge threat to the UAE and the rest of the Gulf region. And while I think Abu Dhabi will engage al-Shara's government very pragmatically, and Abu Dhabi has already been doing that since the fall of Assad, I think it's no secret that the UAE was not very pleased about the fact that Assad fell. The UAE invested a lot of diplomatic energy in trying to shore up the Assad regime, really going back to late 2018. So I think Abu Dhabi considered Assad's fall to be a loss, and they're the most nervous about the future under HTS rule. But Abu Dhabi, nonetheless, is going to try to make the most of the situation and to try to engage HTS and hope that HTS is very moderate in its governance. I think on the other end of the spectrum, the GCC state that is most comfortable with HTS running Syria would be Qatar.
Yeah.
You know, Qatar was the Arab League member that was most rigidly opposed to renormalizing with Assad, and early on in the Syrian crisis, Doha gave a tremendous amount of support to rebel groups. So I think the fall of Assad in late 2024 was really a vindicating moment for the Qataris. And given the ties that Qatar had with many of the rebel groups, I think Doha is very well positioned to play an extremely influential role in post-Assad Syria. I think we can say that while the UAE might be looking at Syria from a threat prism, the Qataris view the situation in post-Assad Syria as the basis of some opportunity right now.
Well, Giorgio, along with Qatar, of course, we should mention Turkey as well. Let's come to Turkey a bit. Turkey is also widely seen as the biggest winner in Syria. While regional countries might be relieved by the decline of Iran's influence in Syria and perhaps the broader region, Turkey's rising influence might pose some kind of threat for some in the Gulf. How will they take it, do you think? And also, do you think the situation in the new Syria is more likely to lead to resurfacing of the past tensions between this Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Ankara-Doha axis, or greater levels of cooperation among 6 Gulf states and Turkey?
Yeah, great question. I think that it's very difficult to predict one way or the other right now. We're only a few weeks less than 1 month into the post-Assad period in Syria, and it's difficult to know exactly how all of these geopolitical dynamics will play out. But I think it's certainly possible that the situation with HTS at the helm in Damascus could possibly lead to some resurfacing of tensions between Ankara and Abu Dhabi. As everyone knows, after the Arab Spring uprisings erupted in 2011, really up until maybe 2020, 2021, there was a tremendous amount of tension between Ankara and Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi saw Turkey's support for certain Islamist groups and causes in the Arab world to represent a threat to the UAE. So we'll have to see how the situation unfolds in Syria. But I think there, as I said, is certainly potential for some conflicts of interest between Ankara and Abu Dhabi. But at the same time, given the fact that the GCC states and Turkey have many common interests in Syria, whether we're talking about stability, talking about trying to convince the incoming Trump administration to lift sanctions on Syria, we could also say that Abu Dhabi and Ankara have some common cause when it comes to Syria. I think as far as Qatar is concerned, the leadership in Doha, I think, learned some very valuable lessons from the experiences that Qatar had in the 2010s, going back to the way in which Qatar reacted to the Arab Spring uprisings and then the blockade that began in the middle of 2017. I think Qatar is really focused on having good relations with its fellow GCC countries, especially Saudi Arabia. Of all the countries that were blockading Qatar, Doha definitely wants to have good relations with all of them, but I think Saudi Arabia is the most important. And I think moving forward, as Qatar navigates the landscape in post-Assad Syria, I think Qatar will be sensitive to the interests and the concerns of Saudi Arabia and will want to avoid making any moves that could lead to the leadership in Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, or Egypt becoming suspicious of Qatar or viewing Qatar as some sort of a threat to their interests. So in general, I think Qatar is going to be working very hard to sort of coordinate its policies with other Arab countries, as opposed to doing things that makes Qatar stand out as an outlier when it comes to the new Syria.
Giorgio, speaking of the second Trump presidency, his first term was largely dominated by maximum pressure on Iran, and indeed many Gulf countries at that time wanted this policy for a declining Iran, for containing Iran, let's say. But a lot has changed. The Middle East has undergone significant changes since Trump's first term. So what do you expect this term from Trump? How will Gulf countries react if Trump returns to maximum pressure campaign on Iran? Will they sustain their self-reliance and regional reconciliation, do you think, despite pressure to reverse the course? speaking on Iran's policy and also Trump's second term, if Trump's first term is any guide, what do you expect?
Yeah, so you make a very important point, and that is that when Trump left the Oval Office in January 2021, the dynamics in the Middle East were very different from what they are today. So it's not exactly clear how the incoming Trump administration is going to adapt to the new realities of the Middle East. When Trump's first term began in 2017, not only were some of the GCC members like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain okay with maximum pressure, these countries lobbied the Trump administration to pursue maximum pressure, and they were very important partners with the maximum pressure campaign against Iran. But due to some issues that maybe we can talk about in another discussion, those countries realized that maximum pressure failed to make them more secure, and in fact, they became more vulnerable to Iran's aggression. And they came around to concluding that détente with Iran was the key to security in the Gulf. And as your viewers know, the Saudis and Iranians famously renormalized their diplomatic relations by signing an agreement in China back in March 2023. And ever since then, the Saudi-Iranian renormalization deal has remained in place. And I think if the Trump administration is going to do another round of maximum pressure, and I certainly think we should expect that from Trump, I don't think it's realistic to expect Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Arab countries to partner with that maximum pressure campaign. While we talk about Iran being weakened and the axis of resistance being weakened, that's true, but that does not negate the fact that the Iranians can still harm the Gulf Arab countries very easily. We all remember the Saudi Aramco attack of September 2019. The Iranians can still be behind similar episodes that will pose an enormous threat to the security and economic interests of GCC states. So to get to the point, I think if the second Trump administration pushes a maximum pressure 2.0 campaign, I think the only country in the region that would be a full-fledged partner to that campaign would be Israel, not the GCC states. So it will be interesting, however, to see if the second Trump administration tries to put pressure on the Gulf Arab countries to support a US-led pressure campaign against Iran. But a final point I'll make here is that the world has become even more multipolar since Trump left the White House in 2021. We have a continued rise of China, with Beijing playing more of an important role in the Middle East. And you have, there are more options for Gulf countries in this day and age of greater multipolarity. So when we talk about the U.S. possibly putting pressure on Arab states to align with the maximum pressure agenda, it's not going to be so easy for Trump to really pressure or bully these countries into doing what he wants toward Iran. We'll have to see how the Trump administration goes about these dynamics, but I think probably what we can expect is a very dysfunctional, confusing, and contradictory approach to Iran. We shouldn't forget that for all the talk of maximum pressure 2.0, I think Trump is going to actually want to reach a new nuclear deal with Tehran. So it'll be interesting to see how the Trump administration moves forward.
Giorgio, what about broader U.S. Foreign policy towards Syria and also Middle East? Complete withdrawing from Syria, do you expect, especially in light of recent New Year's deadly attack in New Orleans? Do you think this might impact on the U.S. policy with Trump 2.0?
Well, Trump is notoriously unpredictable, so it's always risky and sometimes unwise to make bold predictions about what he's going to do. I think Trump is going to want to come across as being very tough on terrorism. I think in light of the recent attack in New Orleans, there's a good chance that his administration will be increasingly focused on combating groups such as Islamic State. This seems to suggest that the U.S. will remain very focused on the region from a counterterrorism perspective. But Trump also doesn't like having U.S. ground troops in the conflict-torn parts of the Middle East. I think Trump is very big on having a large U.S. military presence in the GCC states, but pulling troops out of conflict zones in Iraq and Syria. When it comes to fighting organizations like Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, probably Trump will be more keen to go after these groups with drone operations, waging operations remotely. And therefore, I think it's certainly possible that we will see Trump pull U.S. troops out of Syria. Obviously, one of the main motivations the U.S. has had for keeping troops in Syria is officially to fight Islamic State. But in my opinion, the real reason has been to counter Iran's influence in Syria. So now with the new government in Syria, we're going to have Iran's influence greatly diminished. So that might be a pretext for Trump to pull the troops out of the country. That being said, possibly the most important set of questions about Trump 2.0 and the new Syria has to do with the U.S. sanctions that have been on Syria, specifically the Caesar Act sanctions, which went into effect during Trump's first term. This will be incredibly important to the future of Syria, this question of whether or not the second Trump administration keeps those sanctions in place or decides to lift them, because they were initially to go after the Assad government. So now that the Assad government is gone, there's sort of a new set of questions about what is the logic for keeping the sanctions in place. It is just so difficult to know how Trump will proceed, but we should keep in mind that Trump tends to make foreign policy decisions not based on any sort of vision or ideology, but often in a transactional context in which he makes policy based on the highest bidder. And I do think with Turkey and the Gulf Arab countries wanting the U.S. to lift sanctions, we should consider that lobbyists in Washington who represent these countries in the Middle East will probably be working very hard to convince the second Trump administration to lift sanctions. And it is certainly possible that they will successfully persuade Trump to do so. No guarantee that that will happen, but we should consider the possibility.
Well, time is up. Thank you very much, Giorgio Cafiero. Thanks for your contribution, and again, Happy New Year for you and for the region, for the whole world, hopefully.
Thanks, and same to you.
Thank you. Evet, Saat Farkı'nda bu hafta ABD'ye, Washington DC'ye uzandık. Körfez ülkeleri özellikle Orta Doğu ve bilhassa Körfez ülkeleri üzerine çalışmalarıyla bilinen Giorgio Cafiero, Gulf State Analytics'in kurucusu ve CEO'su Giorgio Cafiero ile konuştuk. Suriye'de yeni dönemi, Körfez ülkelerinin rolünü, özellikle Suudi Arabistan'ın ve aynı zamanda Türkiye'nin de rolünü, Trump döneminden, ikinci Trump döneminden beklentileri konuştuk. Önümüzdeki hafta yine farklı bir konuyla, farklı bir konukla karşınızda olmak dileğiyle. Hoşçakalın.